Hey guys, what is up? It's Andy here, back at you with another video, and today we are with SJF Attorneys, and he's been kind enough to give us a little bit more information on what exactly went down with regards to the Haze Club case. If you haven't heard, the Haze Club case has been a case that has been in the High Court for a long time now, and it is with regards to DPCs, Dacha Private Clubs. There's been a judgment handed down, and Stefan is going to break it down for us. But this is a big moment in the cannabis industry, and I think it's all really important that you guys listen and pay attention to what's happened in this case. It's really going to be a change in the industry for the next coming while. So without further ado, here's Stefan, and hope you guys enjoy. Hey Stefan, thanks so much for joining us again to share some information about the Haze Club case. And I'm going to jump in and straight away just ask if you can give us a little bit of insights into what happened with the case. Was it guilty? What was the charge? What was the verdict? If you can just give us a little bit of a summary on that.
Sure, Andrew, and thanks for having me. Always a pleasure being here on the Marijuana SA channel. So this was, in a sense, a judgment, but it was heard on an application. So what essentially happened was the Haze Club got prosecuted, and then they applied for an application, and pending the outcome of that application, they can then proceed to trial. So in essence, you kind of would call it a trial within a trial, to determine if if the Part A of the matter was heard and, this judgment were to be successful, there would have been no need for any prosecution, and therefore they tried to split this, and therefore they can now, for example, continue with Part B, which will be the actual prosecution, but now that will also be depending on the outcome of the appeal that they have lodged. So they've kind of split the matter up to say, before we determine sentencing and the guilty, we first need to determine the legality of the club in itself. The court now, the judgment came back with, unfortunately, a very narrow-minded view, in my opinion, about the private use of cannabis, and therefore said, this right cannot be outsourced when it comes to the cultivation of your personal cannabis. So therefore, it is, in a sense, a judgment. And yes, they have been charged and are still, facing the charges, but no conviction has been made in the sense that they have now been found guilty, because that will only happen pending the outcome of the appeal. So they do have a bit more time now to try and wiggle their legal defense. And for the moment, the prosecution is currently, a stay of prosecution. So the prosecution will not proceed pending the finalization of Part A of the matter.
Brilliant. I've heard a lot of people throwing the word precedent around and sort of using it very open-handedly with regards to obviously now the case. What does a precedent mean, and is this a case of set precedent?
It is, in my view, obviously a precedent, but in order to determine how far this precedent stretch, we need to look at what we call the precedent system. And this was designed and implemented to prevent any lower courts from interfering and making contradictory judgments to a higher court. So in essence, the precedent system means that every court is bound by a judgment based on similar facts of a higher court. So, for example, a magistrate's court, a regional court, a district court, none of them can now go against the High Court's judgment to try and declare this model legal. However, the High Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Courts, they are higher courts than the High Court. So the precedent system will not apply to them. What was a great precedent was the 2018 Constitutional Court ruling, because that was the highest court in the land, and therefore every other court was therefore bound by the decision and cannot overturn it. Currently, half a precedent has been set because the lower courts cannot now go against that judgment. However, the High Court of Appeal and the constitutional courts are in no way bound by that judgment and can easily overturn that to set a new precedent in terms of that matter.
slightly higher up the chain. So okay, so I assume now they obviously want to appeal this this sort of outcome, and they've got to appeal it in the they've got to appeal it in a higher court, and are they expecting a completely 180 outcome or just a better outcome?
Yeah, so we're hoping for a better outcome in the Supreme Court of Appeal. It's there in Bloemfontein. And we see a lot of flaws in the judgment. Now, we are not necessarily saying that if these legal flaws are to be addressed, that we are expecting a 180 outcome. For sure not. That outcome can never be guaranteed. What we do think is that there are constitutional essential matters, underlying issues that the court overlooked, that maybe have a few judges applied their mind a bit more to these controversial issues, they might have come to a different finding. It's not guaranteed. It's in no way to say the whole model might be declared legal. We're hoping maybe a certain aspect of it. Because currently, saying that the cultivation is not allowed to be outsourced, technically, if I throw my seed in the garden and I've got a gardener every week, the moment he now comes and waters my garden, he's a drug dealer, which is absolutely nonsensical. And it would essentially make a lot of, low-paying employees drug dealers overnight. And they already are being dragged through the justice system just for pure consumption. So the harms currently are so severe that we are saying there are less restrictive measures, and that's just another concept we think the court has failed to take into consideration.
I think that's going to have legs to stand on for sure. And now with a lot of the guys watching, if you're probably the clubs out there, what's the current situation for the clubs? Where do they stand at the moment?
So I want to say your strategic position would have always been, once you do have a run-in with the law, you would apply for what we call the stay in prosecution. This stay in prosecution was pending the outcome of the High Court matter. Since the High Court matter has now come out, but it is being appealed, your strategy would remain exactly the same. You would now still apply for a stay in prosecution pending the outcome of the appeal court matter. I like to think of it as a classic ANC strategy, not innocent until proven guilty by a court of law, but innocent until we've exhausted all our remedial options. And it's in no way the correct way to follow this, but due to the way cannabis has been approached by our justice system, we do think it's justified in this sense to say, hey, we're not going to go lay down until the Constitutional Court even perhaps says so, because previously that was the only court willing to protect our rights. And it wouldn't surprise me if it is again a situation where the Constitutional Court is the only one, willing to protect the rights. But until then, the strategy would remain the same for you. This does maybe increase the risk, that's for sure, because a policeman, aware of the judgment, might not be aware of the appeal case that's now already been lodged. He comes there guns blazing based on the judgment, and you will still get processed just to go back to court to inform them that it has been appealed, and you would like to apply for a stay in prosecution pending the outcome of the appeal court matter.
Yeah, I have heard stories of that already happening in certain cases, but as you said, I guess they'll just get another stay of prosecution because it's in appeal. Now, as a more of a conceptual side of this, how big of an impact is this on the cannabis industry? We know it's huge, but from your side on the legal front, this must be massive.
Yeah, and this isn't the first, legal blow that we've been dealt. I was working long and hard with a Barloworld matter that also recently came out regarding employees' cannabis use and proving whether someone is impaired in the workplace or not. So this is now the second judgment kind of just continuously blocking the cannabis industry from developing. And I think the march that has now been organized for Saturday speaks for itself when we say, how are people feeling about this? I think people are infuriated. People are impatient now. You know, we were so positive, and we were all very happy when the Constitutional Court came out and gave Parliament 2 years to amend their legislation. And I think we were all realistic back at the time to understand and know that yes, it might not take 2 years, it might take a bit longer. But currently we are 4 years later. We've got two judgments, totally illogical and prohibiting the development of the industry, while you've got a president announcing it on every single State of the Nation address. We've got one proposed bill that's barely worth the paper it's written on, without even any recreational use in sight. And while we've got a cannabis master plan, we've got heads of the table that call for proactive research to be done, while we all know the research is available, and that we all know you continuing your research because you are scared of this plant because you don't understand it. In the process, you are causing so much harm to your everyday citizens that they have now organized a march to let their voices be heard. So I don't think it's necessary to elaborate too much on where the people stand. I think that, you know, take a look around and it speaks for itself.
I personally, I'm completely blinded by just how crazy it is that where are these people that are standing against it? Because I guess I'm in the industry and everyone I speak to is so okay with it, and it's changed lives and it's healing people and it's helping people, and I've never heard a bad thing about the cannabis industry. And just like now you have these lawmakers throwing out these like ridiculous judgments, and I think unfortunately there's just a small group of naysayers that are just unwilling to look at the data and the facts and the information, and unwilling to look at what other developed countries have done and the laws that they've adopted. And yes, it's stifling our economy. It's well needed. You know, the jobs that it could create are well needed, I know personally. And yes, it's just quite troubling to see that it's...
Yeah, I have to say, Andrew, for me, the most troubling thing is obviously still the police. I've got a lot of incidents where a lot of prosecutors have become a lot more open-minded to not prosecute people. But, you know, they can only decide not to prosecute once the docket's on their desk. And once you've already been through hell over the weekend and spent the whole weekend there in a jail cell, just for you to come and appear and for me to get the charges dropped. So a lot of the cases isn't necessarily the whole judicial system, like for example, the National Prosecuting Authority. In my view and in my personal experience, I can't obviously speak for everyone, but I have noticed that I can communicate and argue and convince the National Prosecuting Authority recently a lot more easier than it is talking to the police. There is absolutely just no talking to the police. They're running around like a bunch of bullies, just absolutely doing what they want. No disregard for whether you actually get prosecuted, whether they have sufficient evidence to prove you guilty beyond reasonable doubts. So in my view, I think if we can just somehow have intermediate interventions or temporary interventions just to limit the power of the police, because currently they're exercising way above and way beyond what that Constitutional Court ruling allowed them.
At an immense cost of trauma, time, experience, jobs, stifling people's...
the damage to people's lives is
is terrible. But guys, you heard it from Steph yourselves. Hopefully this brought some light and shed some info into what's happening. We do need support throughout this process. Just make sure to stay in touch with like the guys at Fields of Green for All. They are completely on top of this all the time, and you can always just leave comments if you have more questions. We'll try answer everything. But Stefan, thanks so much for giving the info today. It's really important to have it from both sides, the cultural side and then also from the legal side.